Putin thought Ukraine was Czechoslovakia in the summer of 1968. Sure, the Ukrainians may make a valiant effort, but the terrifying sight of an uninterrupted conga line of Russian tanks would stop any genuine resistance. A rattled Kyiv would return to the motherland's ever-embracing bosom in a due and relatively bloodless course. At most, plucky Ukraine may give it a decent, honorable go despite the terrible odds. Sort of like how a group of heroic, white-clad from head-to-toe Finns on cross-country skis once resisted Soviet invaders for a long period. Unfortunately, Putin is learning a hard, confusing lesson. Don't mess with Ukrainians, who appear to be getting stronger day by day. But what does that mean to the Russian economy and the world economy in general? Let's find out. A defeated Vladimir Putin is retaliating, pursuing increasingly dangerous plans and pushing Western cities to play out his deadly scenarios. The Russian president is scaring Ukrainians in far places from the front lines of the conflict. He is suspected of directing the sabotage of European gas infrastructure. Worst of all, he's threatening nuclear war. Russia is unlikely to outright threaten a NATO member, but the Kremlin looks increasingly determined to wipe down the mechanisms that underpin NATO's nation society in the shadows. The Nord Stream undersea gas pipelines connecting Russia and Europe first experienced explosions, which suggested a sabotage effort with Kremlin connections. Then, someone disconnected the lines that kept Germany's trains operating, increasing the possibility of another Kremlin conspiracy. Other sabotage scenarios are, unsettlingly, many. We have many pipelines, oil and gas, and data cables, Latvian Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš said. We simply need to raise our awareness of what might be vulnerable, he added over the phone, and then strengthen the defense of our potentially vulnerable infrastructure. In an updated strategy paper earlier this year, NATO admitted that such hybrid attacks may become significant enough to trigger the military alliance's Article 5 provision, which declares that a military attack on one ally is an attack on all. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters that the alliance has doubled its presence in the Baltic and North Seas in response to the Nord Stream events, and that members are increasing security around key installations. Despite attempts in recent years to increase NATO's resilience, analysts and officials agree that Europe's infrastructure networks are so vast and frequently held by private corporations that governments' options are limited. National authorities can strengthen patrols on land and water to increase deterrence, but monitoring everything is impossible. There's also the cyber danger, which adds another burdensome layer. Kherson, an area the size of Belgium with green steppes and lush farmland crisscrossed by rivers and irrigation canals, was Russia's sole wholly captured Ukrainian province soon after the invasion began on February 24th. On the ground in Ukraine, Russia has completed its most recent withdrawal from the land it seized in February and March. Sergei Surovikin, the commander of Russian forces in Ukraine, said on November 9th that he was withdrawing from the west bank of the Dnieper River and Kherson City in southern Ukraine. He stated that Russia's power would be concentrated on the other fronts. Ukraine announced the recapture of 12 communities in the Kherson area on the same day as Surovikin's claim. Ukrainian soldiers claim to have moved 7 kilometers into that region the next day. Ukrainian General Valery Zaluzhny seized on Russia's withdrawal as yet another win. Ukraine has been bombing Russian command bunkers and ammo stockpiles in the region with precise weaponry for weeks. Ukraine's general staff said on November 11th that their troops had reached the Dnieper River in many locations in western Kherson and had effective firepower over the remainder of the country west of the river. Russia claimed to have finished its retreat in a timely manner at that point. However, Ukraine's general staff stated that withdrawing Russian soldiers were involved in a particularly high casualty episode on November 12th. Russia had demolished 2 spans of the Antonovsky Bridge and blew up the road running atop the Kakhovka Dam to obstruct the Ukrainian advance, rendering the 2 remaining routes across the Dnieper in Kherson inoperable. As the cold winter approaches, Ukrainian officials strive to keep Kherson city safe from Russian mines and give its surviving 80,000 citizens necessities such as heat, water, food, power, and medication. Ukraine will most likely try to move east through the whole of Kherson province next. It might then continue south into Russia-annexed Crimea or east into Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainian General Staff reported an increase in occupation troops in the Melitopol area, Zaporizhzhia's main urban area. Fortifications and defense structures are being built around the city's perimeter. Columns are arriving from the side of Tokmak. However, Ukraine's commander-in-chief has stated that he aims to retake Crimea in 2023. After supervising the hoisting of the Ukrainian flag in Kherson, Zelensky seemed to hint at that purpose. According to Zelensky, the liberation of Kherson City can be compared to D-Day, the Normandy landings. It was not yet the ultimate battle against evil, but it had already set the entire path of events. Meanwhile, the war has caused severe issues in Europe's energy supplies as winter approaches. The UK is already experiencing economic turmoil, and things are expected to get worse over the winter. British people are protesting against the skyrocketing fuel prices. The sanctions against Russia have raised energy costs and prompted Russian response by limiting supplies to EU members. Because the US is not so dependent on Russia's energy supplies, it is relatively easier for the US to demand and implement sanctions. But the fuel prices are still increasing in the US. On the other hand, Europe is very reliant on Russia, and when that energy supply is depleted, it must seek other, much more expensive supplies. The IMF raised Russia's GDP projection by 2.5% in late July 2022, but other experts predict a long-term crisis for the Russian economy and explained its resilience primarily by a short-term spike in oil costs. Russia exploited its economic strength by restricting gas supplies to Europe, while highlighting its agricultural prowess as the world's top wheat exporter. By August 2022, Russia had sold nearly as much oil as it had before its invasion of Ukraine. The OPEC Plus group of oil producers, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, have also decided to cut oil output by 2 million barrels per day. This decision has also helped the Russian economy drastically. Sales to the Middle East and Asia helped compensate for falling European exports, and because of the increased price, Moscow's revenues were $20 billion monthly, up from $14.6 billion the previous year. Despite international sanctions imposed during the Russo-Ukrainian War, the value of Russian energy sales has grown, and its exports have expanded with new financing choices and payment ways for overseas clients. At the same time, the Russian budget accrued a record deficit of 1.45 trillion rubles by August, owing mostly to a drop in tax revenue from fossil fuel exports from 70 billion to 33.7 billion rubles each month, resulting in a 10% decline in monthly budget earnings. In September, the Russian Ministry of Finance announced a 10% cut in spending for all governmental sectors. Meanwhile, the EU is bracing itself for a big social, economic, and political storm, and popular and parliamentary support for the war is dwindling. As a result, the disparities between the EU and the US will be stressed. Even in the United States, the balance of power might be upset if Trump and the Republicans win the midterm elections, making it more challenging for Biden to continue his seemingly unending support for Ukraine. Trump has made it plain that he supports a diplomatic deal with Russia in Ukraine. From his perspective, the United States should focus on its principal adversary, China. Trump was known for his with us or against us rule against China. If Russia regains the initiative through greater army numbers and the devastation of Ukraine's infrastructure, the pressure on the West to withdraw from the war will intensify. At that time, the West will exert significant pressure on Ukraine to reach an agreement in which Russia's advances on the ground are formalized on the bargaining table. Putin has calculated this. Following the September attack, Kyiv grew increasingly aggressive, announcing unequivocally that its war goals included the complete liberation of all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. Zelensky has gone so far as to create legislation prohibiting any engagement with Russia while Putin is in office. These comments are primarily intended to enhance public and military morale. If the situation on the ground shifts in Russia's favor and NATO's backing wanes, Zelensky may change his tune and agree to a settlement. After all, he was chosen as the candidate for peace with Russia. If he continues to resist, he may be dismissed. A true peace treaty may not be signed, but a ceasefire may be agreed upon if situations warrant it.